in Brazil. In a watershed moment, Brazil's democratic institutions made history, and in doing so sent a strong message across the equator. This is how you confront authoritarianism before it's too late. Brazil's Supreme Court voted 4-1 to convict the former president Jair Bolsonaro of plotting a military coup after losing the 2022 election. He was sentenced to more than 27 years in prison. It was the first time in Brazil's history that a coup leader will serve serious prison time. Imagine that. A democracy taking on a former president who tried to overthrow the will of the voters and winning. And consider who Bolsonaro was before he entered the race. After retiring from the army, never rising above the rank of captain, he spent decades in the legislature, known mostly for his vitriol. He once told a female opponent she was too ugly to rape. Another time, he said he'd rather have a dead son than a gay one. Especially alarming for Brazilians, he was openly nostalgic for Brazil's brutal military dictatorship, which ruled for 21 years, from 1964 to 1985. Backed by Washington in the name of fighting communism, that regime detained and tortured tens of thousands of citizens. Hundreds were murdered or disappeared. This was the period Bolsonaro openly longed for, declaring, "If a few innocent people die, that's all right." From the very beginning, Bolsonaro's prosecution was closely watched by Donald Trump and his administration. The two largest economies in the Western Hemisphere were on a collision course after Trump, in July, sent Brazil's government a letter demanding its Supreme Court end Bolsonaro's trial immediately. Trump feared Bolsonaro's conviction because it represents Trump's greatest fear, a blueprint for how democracy can hold strong men accountable. For Trump, Brazil is a mirror. The speed and force with which Brazil's institutions moved to crush the cancer of autocracy before it spread across its institutions is proof that democracy can prevail even in the face of relentless, violent assault. Proof that the rule of law can be stronger than the cult of personality. You can see why that would be profoundly upsetting for an aspiring dictator. At its core, this struggle centers on whether modern democracies can defend themselves against authoritarian strongmen, foreign or domestic. Entirely expectedly, Trump lashed out after the Brazilian ruling, saying that he was very unhappy with Bolsonaro's conviction, calling it a terrible thing, very terrible. Secretary of State Marco Rubio went even further, promising on X that the United States would respond accordingly to this witch hunt. But this campaign of American intimidation of Brazil for prosecuting Bolsonaro was already in full swing long before this week's verdict. Earlier this summer, Donald Trump slapped a 50% tariff on Brazilian exports, a warning shot that siding with democracy would come at a cost. Then came sanctions against several top Brazilian officials, including the Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes, who oversaw Bolsonaro's trial. Earlier this summer, Rubio imposed visa bans on most of Brazil's justices after Moraes ordered Bolsonaro to wear an ankle tag and banned him from giving interviews. And just last month, the U.S. Treasury sent a letter to Brazil's largest banks demanding to know what steps they were taking to comply with the American-imposed sanctions. These measures were imposed, by the way, under the Global Magnitsky Act, which is a tool reserved for war criminals and human rights abusers. As the New York Times reported, Trump's administration placed Justice Moraes on that same blacklist that is typically reserved for some of the world's worst human rights violators, including those who were involved in the brutal 2018 murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi and the architects behind China's persecution of its Uyghur minority. Think about that. The U.S. government is treating a judge in a democracy who is defending his country's constitution the same way it treats torturers and war criminals, all to bully Brazil into letting Bolsonaro walk free. Writing in the New York Times, Felipe Campante and Stephen Levitsky observed, in short, the Trump administration has sought to use tariffs and sanctions to bully Brazilians into subverting their legal system and their democracy along with it. In effect, the U.S. administration is punishing Brazilians for doing something Americans should have done but failed to: hold a former president accountable for attempting to overturn an election, end quote. Despite relentless attacks on its sovereignty and its economy, Brazil has refused to bend. By leading through example, its defiance showed the world the power of standing firm. The president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, strongly denounced Washington's interference, and his poll numbers rose as a result. Justice Moraes received unwavering support from Brazil's institutions. Justice Flávio Dino summed up the nation's defiance when he cast his vote this week to convict Bolsonaro, quote, "Does anyone believe that a tweet from a foreign government official will change a ruling in the Supreme Court?" End quote. Indeed, the parallels between Trump and Bolsonaro are uncanny. Both rose on hard right populism. Both spent years undermining democratic norms. Both, when defeated, claimed the election was rigged. Trump's big lie led to January 6, 2021. Bolsonaro's big lie led to January 8, 2023, 2 years and 2 days later, almost to the hour. But here's where their stories split. Brazil's institutions acted quickly, aggressively, and unapologetically. Brazil's judiciary, remembering the brutality of military rule a mere 4 decades ago, understood that democracy is fragile. They understood how quickly democracy can collapse if you don't fight for it aggressively and without hesitation. Justice Moraes put it bluntly. We realized we could be Churchill or Chamberlain. I didn't want to be Chamberlain. Brazil's government cracked down on disinformation. They suspended accounts inciting violence. Ahead of the 2022 election, they tackled the flood of falsehoods on social media, images of fake ballot boxes doctored with photos of politicians with Fidel Castro. This wasn't polite, bipartisan, let's wait and see governance. It was decisive, urgent action, unapologetic and unflinching, because Brazil's leaders understood the stakes. And when the January 8th attack came, the court wasted no time, barring Bolsonaro from office until 2030, indicting him within a year, and now convicting him to 27 years. Speaking to The New Yorker, Olivia Stunkel, a prominent Brazilian political scientist, defended the court's aggressive actions, noting that they were proportional to the scale of the threat that Brazil faced. Quote, "Brazil ended up being the poster child for how you protect democracy over the past few years. The challenge is how to ensure that the court goes back to normal, because I think it's not healthy for any democracy to have the Supreme Court be a key political actor all the time," end quote. Meanwhile, Brazil's conservatives, though critical of the judiciary, did not rally around Bolsonaro the way Republicans rallied around Trump. With Brazil's right fractured into multiple parties, no single extremist bloc existed to shield him from accountability. Here at home, it was the exact opposite. After January 6th, the House impeached Trump. The Senate had the chance to convict him, but Republicans acquitted. The Justice Department waited nearly 3 years to bring charges. By then, Trump was already running again, recasting himself as a victim. And only last summer, the Supreme Court handed him sweeping immunity for official acts, derailing the case entirely. Bolsonaro is in prison. Trump is back in the Oval Office, openly dismantling the checks and balances of American democracy. John Meacham reminds us, quote, "The forces Donald Trump represents are perennial. He is not an aberration, but a manifestation of the darker elements that have coursed through American society and history. When we are at our best, we make those forces ebb. And when we're at our worst, they flow."